This conference will now be recorded.
So let's go to this, which is a better educational topic, and talk about bottoming bases. And this will fit in with some of the questions that you were asking. And so this comes up because Marty Garrison sent me some very good questions on this. And it was based on what they were. Somebody asked, how do you know it's Reg A? Well, you see them advertised in the newspaper or on the internet or on a TV commercial, which you do not see any of that with regular IPOs. And I think in all the ads they disclose, I think they put in there as a Reg A security offering or something in the fine print. But they're going to be small. I mean, that Nightscope raised $22 million. I mean, it's just it's puny. You know, the big IPOs will raise a billion, and the decent sized ones are still raising 150, 250, 500 million. So they're just tiny. But the main thing is you'll see ads for them. I mean, it's almost like the Reg A IPOs. You can sell like Girl Scout cookies. You know, go do it at Walmart outside, and it doesn't violate the law. You can't do that with regular IPOs. So anyway, Marty sent me a question based on some things in the paper, that comments that were made on Vertex, and I want to go back and study the research on these before bringing up that chart. Because if we start with that chart instead of the rules, it's not going to work out right. And I'll show you why when we get to the end of this. And when I talk to getting to the end, I don't know if you ever saw this movie, The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. It's a neat little movie about couples that were retiring from America, and they were going to a retirement home in India, which turned out to be a dilapidated old hotel, um, with the most optimistic young guy in the world running it, named Sonny. But at one time, you know, nothing works. They're old couples are frustrated about everything. And at one point, he tells them that they have a saying there in India that um, everything will be all right in the end. And if everything is not all right, it is not yet the end. And so I like that. And that came back to me as I was putting this together. So my history, my experience with bottoming bases is pretty much zero. I didn't even have a page for bottoming bases, you know, in my OneNote handy notebook where I put everything trading. I mean, I have a page, I have a notebook page, just electronic, it's digital, but it's like you have one of those colored tabs in your college notebook, and I have pages behind it. So under the bases tab, I have, you know, the short stroke, the high tight flag, the cup with handle, the cup without handle, the double bottom, with all the shakeout plus three. You know, I have all that. I didn't have until now a page for bottoming bases because I hadn't studied these, and I had to go do some research. So that's the good thing about teaching this, is occasionally y'all make me go figure something out I didn't know about. So I appreciate that. So it was not in my research, but I did go to my book on Kindle, Bill's book, because I have it on Kindle just for doing research. I like reading the hard copies. And so the word bottoming or bottoming base are not in Bill's book either. So that made me feel a little better. And so my initial thought when I think about that phrase and just what I've read in the paper over the years, I thought, okay, this is a base that does not have a prior uptrend. So I went into it researching it. That was my initial thought. And that's not where I ended up. So it was not in the book, but Bill has talked about it. They've mentioned it on IBD Live. And so I'm thinking that this is an advanced concept that he covered in the advanced workshops, the master's workshop, the level 4, because it was not in the book. And it may be covered more in the paper and it's being mentioned now, but it wasn't back then. So I think this is like his teaching about, you know, how you might can wade in between a rally day and a follow through day. It's not in the book, but he covered it in some advanced workshops, and like calling early follow through days or aggressive follow through days. He'd cover that in the advanced workshops, and he'd tell them, y'all are advanced traders. I'm talking to y'all about stuff that's not in the book and not in the newspaper. So this is filtered down, this bottoming base idea, mainly some in the newspaper and IBD Live. So there's several articles in the paper that talk about these. I'm gonna send you the links. There's 3 or 4. So when I send you the post-meeting email, I'm gonna send you those. And here's what I noticed, a big key right off the bat. So this is out of one of those articles. First, a bottoming base forms when the market has undergone a cataclysmic bear market. And so I go right now, well, have we undergone a cataclysmic bear market? No. 2000 was cataclysmic, no doubt. 2007 financial bear, 2008, that was cataclysmic. We're not. So we're talking about in this article says need a 40 to 50% drop. I mean, I would think the COVID bear, that was kind of cataclysmic. So it was 30 point something percent. It was just very fast. So you're going to have the leaders really getting hit, and you have to form the right side of what they call a bottoming base that may take months, even years to get to. And then it also says we want to apply all our normal rules on good basis. So we want symmetry. We want volume coming down as we're coming down the left side of the base, volume go up as we're going up the right side. We want tight trading. So all our regular rules apply when we talk about bottoming bases. So like I said, we don't have this yet. So we almost could just stop talking about it because I'm not sure the rule has been triggered. This may work on the best of the best right after we're coming out of a serious bear market. But let's go through and keep going and talk about what I found in my research. So here's the charts that are in the articles that I'm going to send you the links to. So here's Google. So here's what you're going to find out. The bottoming base identified in this article is here. It is not the bottom of the chart. So the language is a little bit confusing to me right off the bat, because when I think about a bottoming base, I thought we were talking about this. That's not what Bill's talking about. When you read the article, this is the bottoming base. And the problem is it has overhead supply. This does have a prior uptrend. In fact, if you measure this from here to the left side of this base, this is a 54% prior uptrend. So when Bill says the bottoming base takes a while to form, he's talking about from here all the way till you finish that base. That's a great length of time. But he is not talking about, when I look at this chart, he's not talking about trading it here. He's talking about the first full and proper base. So calling this a bottoming base because it's near the bottom, I guess is what it's talking about, but it is still a full and proper base when I started reading these articles. So here's Shake Shack. And so here's the bottom of the chart. And then here is what the article identifies as the bottoming base. The tradable bottoming base is right here. It's a full and proper base that Pattern Rec picks up. So I didn't understand this. And this prior uptrend is 100%. So it does have a prior uptrend. It comes from the bottom, it comes up here, and then it forms this base. Here's another one, Under Armour. So it's getting killed, the market's getting killed. Again, it has 100% prior uptrend. It breaks out of this base and it fails. And really when Bill talks about it, I think the one he talks about trading best is this one over here. When it forms here. But again, he is not talking about trading it coming off the bottom. He's talking about trading it once it forms a full and proper base. Here it is in Apple. Ignore my red marks. I had these on the chart for something else I was studying. There were prior markups. But here's your prior uptrend. Here's a stage one base. So the stock has come down. It's come down from what, 130 to 85, so it's taking a pretty good haircut, and then it builds a prior uptrend, and then it builds a full and proper stage one base, and this is the bottoming base. Nothing over here has anything to do with that, except it's just this long time period of nothingness, and it builds a prior uptrend. So I think maybe this is misnamed. It's kind of like the Livermore shakeout plus 3. You know, the shakeout in that pattern, which is this is an early entry in a double bottom pattern, the shakeout is the second leg down. But where do we add the 3? We add it back to the first leg. So it's not the shakeout leg plus 3, it's the first leg plus 3 once you have the shakeout leg. So the correct name would be the Livermore shakeout, and then put it in reverse and go back and add 3 to the bottom of the first leg down. but that's kind of confusing and too much. So we call it the shakeout plus 3, even though we're not adding the 3 to the shakeout leg. So on bottoming basis, it's the first full and proper base after a stock has been crushed, probably a bad bear market, and has spent a good deal of time, months, not just weeks, establishing a bottom, referring to the bottom of the chart. Then it has an uptrend, prior uptrend, PUT, of at least 30%, and then it forms a new full and proper Canslim base. So I think, so instead of calling it that first, instead of calling it a bottom base, the correct language, or the way to think about it mentally, is the first full and proper base after a long bottom plus a prior uptrend, the PUT. I just abbreviate that like Lee Tanner does. So this would be the sort of the technical correct name, but I was surprised. So I was wrong. The problem is not the lack of a prior uptrend. That's what I thought when I started researching this. Not going to have a prior uptrend. We're buying at the bottom of the chart, and that's just not true. The problem is the overhead supply issue to the left. And Bill does teach once the overhead supply is 18 months old, it's really so old that it doesn't matter anymore. It's not as big a problem. So you can ignore the overhead supply problem once it gets that old. But on these charts we're looking at, it's not that old. So it is a problem, and it's the problem on the bottoming basis. So that brings us to Vertex, which is where Marty started. And this is the problem. So Marty, this is the right way to ask me a question. He sent me a PowerPoint. So these blue backgrounds I colored, so anything with the blue backgrounds, what is the slides he sent me. So right here, this mini chart in the paper is what causes the problem. Bottoming base has 224.50 entry in buy zone. So whoever wrote this for the paper, and they rotate this around, they called this the bottoming base. And that's what confused Marty, and that's what confuses me, because I think they missed the boat. When I went back and did all the research and read all the articles, none of those treat this as the bottoming base. This is the bottom of the chart. The bottom of the base is going to be formed over here. And look at the article. So they say in the article, Vertex is forming a long base with a handle. Okay, so maybe you could treat this, it wouldn't have a prior uptrend, but this whole thing is maybe a long base with a cup with handle. And I'm gonna pull up Vertex and sort of show you that. But they don't call it a bottoming base in this article right here. And this one, now they're not talking about the bottom base, they're talking about this whole long base. But here's what they put in the art. This is the one I think was wrong in the newspaper when they said this is a bottoming base buy point. I don't think it is. I think it's a super long base that is a flawed base because it doesn't have a prior uptrend over here on the left, but it's still a very, very long base, and it has formed a handle. So the later articles, they treat this as the handle. So it breaks out here, and then they treat this as a second handle right here. So in a later article, they call this a 234.68 handle buy point, and surges past the handle buy point. They're talking about here, but now they've switched. Whoever's writing this article, I think, is doing it right, and they're talking about this really, really long base that's not a bottoming base. It's just this really, really long base on the chart. So I think they flipped back and forth, and Marty was saying, looks like a good entry, can't see the base. And that's the problem, because they described it two different ways. And when they call this a bottoming base buy point, I don't agree with that. I don't think the stock has formed a bottoming base yet. I think it's formed this really long base, which is flawed because it doesn't have a prior uptrend. You got to decide if you can live with this or not. And then there's a later article that says this is the 30% prior uptrend. So that article gets it right, because this is the prior uptrend as to which we now are looking for a bottoming base, a full and proper Canslim base to form. So that's how I interpret it. This was the same language that I showed you earlier. And then Marty had just summarized this at the beginning. I just moved this slide to the end. And so again, they switched This long base I think is fine. It's just not a bottoming base. That one right there where they called the long base a bottoming base, this is the one where I think they got it wrong. And maybe I should just snip this part of my presentation out and send it to Hatman and ask him about it, because I think he's the one that's written about this and getting it right. So I think it was a labeling mistake. So I think it's a very long base with a handle area, then a second handle area, flawed base, no prior uptrend. I'm gonna pull up the chart. And it also at the same time has now formed a prior uptrend ahead of a possible bottoming base, which has not shown up yet. Maybe it's just starting. So that's how I view it. So if we go to Vertex, it's funny, this is the one I told you, this broke out on the April 6, 2020 follow through day after the COVID bear, and it hit the profit goal. So I was telling you about that, and you would have been out of it. But so anyway, so I look at this. This is almost maybe in here, one big base. I kind of drew one of those Dr. Wish green lines because it's such a long base. Or really, it's this whole thing. It's just like a humongous base, but it goes from 306 down to 180. So that's a 50% drop. So that's really deep. Anything over 41% is really suspect. But when the article's saying it's forming a base with a long handle, it's talking about like the handle here or the handle here or the handle here based on this big thing, which I do not think is a bottoming base. I think the bottoming base, let's say this stops and forms a proper flat base. There's my prior uptrend, and my bottoming base will be over here, not down here. So I think the paper had it wrong. It's a great question. Made me go research it. I hope that answered it for you, Marty. Let me go back and see if I put anything else in the slides about that. But I think it was a labeling mistake. And that's just how I treat it. And again, when I go back, every chart in not the ones Marty sent me, but all the ones that were, let me get out of that. Just go back to them. So all of these that are in the article clearly show a full and proper base that pattern rec is picking up. There it is. That's your bottoming base, not all this. And so I think I understand it based on everything until they started talking about Vertex recently. And so I understand why that was confusing. And that was a great catch. And I may be wrong. Maybe by the time we meet next month, I'll get an answer from David or somebody and try to follow up on that. All right, group teaching portfolio.